So I'm just going to be going through a simple workflow with some pictures I took from Pirates Cove that both demonstrate under and overexposures and just simple ways to fix them. You're just going to take your folder of images into Lightroom and then click import, and then we're going to go through the culling process, which is just like weeding through the images. So double click on an image to view it in a larger setting, and then press 1 on your keyboard to give it a star, and then go through the images with the arrow keys, and then press 1 to star the ones that you feel are good enough. And I usually just go with my first instinct so that I can get through it quickly, and you'll notice that I'll go back and forth between some photos, and that's okay as long as you don't spend more than a minute going back and forth, because you just have to be efficient about the process, because going through the photos is honestly the most time-consuming and tedious part. This next photo is a good example of a real-life editing situation, because nature is pretty unpredictable and it's always changing in terms of lighting. So after I finish my first round of culling, I go to an overview of images that I just starred, and I press escape, and then I press 1 star on the bottom right corner. And then next I'm selecting images that are similar and choosing the best out of those. So this just makes my job a lot easier so I don't end up with redundant images. And then you select multiple images by clicking and pressing Command on the Mac or Control on a PC, and then clicking on an additional image. And then after that, we're going to be going into our editing. So double click on the first image, and then that's when you're going to start editing. So there's a few simple edits that you typically are going to use for processing raw pictures, because RAWs contain the information but they're not fully processed. It's like taking a film picture and then like going to the darkroom. So you can change your exposure, your blacks, your whites, your temperature, your contrast, and your vibrance. Those are just like the few basic edits, and you can definitely take some time to like play around with those and see what exactly they all do. But vibrance is cool because it changes the color saturation without changing the skin tones, which is nice and helpful. So slide the sliders around and then see just what looks good to your eye, because you're the artist, so you get that creative freedom. And you can also change the vignetting if you don't like that. Sometimes that happens if you use a certain lens on a certain camera. Some people like the vignetting and they even add it, but personally I like to take it out depending on the situation. So sometimes I feel like the image needs to be brighter, but the sky is too bright, so you can drag the highlights down or change the luminance, and I'll go more in depth in that in another video. Basically you can just choose the tone and then see how bright you want the tone of that color, and it's a little bit complicated, but I'll go through that. Yeah, and then if you feel like your picture isn't parallel to the horizon, if that's the effect you wanted, you can also use the crop tool to straighten out the image. And then once you find settings that you really like, you can select multiple images by clicking and pressing shift to select all of them and then syncing the settings. And then afterwards I go through the images individually and adjust if necessary, and this saves time so that I'm not adjusting the whites, blacks, contrast, and all of that stuff every single time. And I personally like it because it keeps the appearances of the images consistent. So you're not having like images that are high contrast versus low contrast, or too warm or too cool. You can also press 0 on an image if you decide you don't want an image anymore, and that will unstar the photo. And this is a safe way to get the photos out of your workflow without actually deleting them. And for the last few photos, they're the darkest, so I didn't include them in the previous synced edits. So I'm just gonna edit the first one and then sync those edits to the next 2, and they're pretty much good to go. And then the last part of your workflow is the exporting process. So just gonna file, export, and name your image to something that is easily recognizable, which apparently I'm struggling with. And you just press export, and that's pretty much it. I actually forgot to star the group image, so it's fine because I didn't delete the images, so I can go back and go through the same process. So the image is pretty much good. I'm just adding some vibrance, doing some basic edits just to enhance it a little bit. So not really like doing intense editing, but just darkening the blacks, brightening the whites, and making sure that you can see the sunset, because that is a good feature of the photo. And the nice thing about Lightroom is that when I go to export, I can change the start number to 14 because I previously exported 13 images, so this image naturally will be the 14th one, and so I can just change it to that. I hope this was helpful. You can feel free to message me or text me or email me if you have any questions. I hope that the next videos will be helpful in just the way you're learning how to use Lightroom. My best piece of advice for using Lightroom is that you can experiment with all the photos because there's really no risk attached to it. You can always reset your settings if you want to and play around with it, see what you like, find your style, and it's a lot more fun than you think it is. The learning process is a little bit grueling at times, but I think with practice and time, you'll get the results that you want.